This is Brent Piaskoski, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
Well, this is Gray, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, episode 132 for October 11th, 2022. Well, today I have the pleasure of bringing you an interview with Brent Piaskoski. How you doing, Brent?
I'm very well. I'm tickety-boo, as I like to say.
Well, and it's really, really neat because you and I grew up in the same place, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Not at the same high school, but it's fascinating. I've interviewed a lot of different people, not too many from Calgary.
We're making it out here, but I'm going back on Wednesday to see my mom for 10 days. But yes, Calgary was my home till 1989.
Wow. Very, very cool. So you stayed longer than me. I left in 86. No. I left in 90.
No.
I left in 90. So you're 1 year ahead of me. I was thinking of wrong school. Well, tell me about that. Tell me about William Aberhart and how at what point did you know that you wanted to be a writer, and what did that look like?
It took a while because when you grow up in Calgary, you don't think the entertainment world is open to you. You don't even know it exists. It's like you wanting to be an astronaut, but you don't know where NASA is, or how do I qualify for that program? Where do I even go? And that's sort of how it was for wanting to be a writer. So I started out as an actor because I think that that's the most obvious thing for anybody in the industry. Oh, acting looks great. So I went to university. I studied acting. I went to Mount Royal College first. And then I was just acting. A comedy club opened up in Calgary on Snickers on, I think it was 9th Avenue. And that had always intrigued me. I remember as a kid getting very excited when anything on Carson, it was a stand-up comedian. So I went pretty quickly and I did an amateur night. And I was like 21 maybe. And I had written in my head maybe 10 years of jokes that I was able to whittle down to like 5 minutes. And I did a 5-minute set and it went great.
Wow.
Like people were saying like, this is amazing. And I kind of got the bug there. Then unfortunately, I didn't know you could repeat jokes. This is because I'd see comics on Carson, and every time I saw them, if it was Seinfeld or Robert Klein, they would do a new bit. So I thought every week I had to do a new 5 minutes.
Wow.
And they did it pretty well the second week, and the third week was okay. By the fourth week, I bombed. And that's when some of it was an improv troupe, came out to me and said, you can repeat material. so that's when I started to, work on my act. And because comedy clubs were starting to open up like crazy, I got work probably before I was ready to, but there was a need. And I went on the road as a comedian. I quit my job at the Bay selling men's suits. And I was on the road for a good 10 years. But during that time, and this was before, you travel to a place and then you have all day to sit there. And this was before the only entertainment was malls, basically. There was no laptops or video games. So I started writing. And that's when I thought, oh, this is my passion. This is what I want to do. Because I was a really good comedian. But also when I look at the great Canadian comedians, like I was working with Norm Macdonald.
Wow.
I was like, oh, I ain't Norm. So I started writing and getting my stuff out there. And so that's when I realized, oh, it's the words. I thought it was the acting, but it's really the words that are really intriguing me about this industry.
Very cool. And so how did that first manifest itself? When did you first send a script somewhere? How did you learn the format?
I didn't learn it very well, that's for sure. I mean, it did start early where I would MASH was coming to its end when I was in high school, and we had to do a project on the war. And so I wrote a MASH script. And I didn't know it was a spec script at the time. It was probably only 7 pages. And the teacher said, oh, it sounds like the show, but it's really not the assignment. And I think I got a C for it, which so I started just writing. And because I was a theater background, I didn't know format. I didn't know multicam format. I didn't know sitcom format. There was no final draft, at least to my ability. I had a Commodore, I think, or my mom would type my stuff out. I would write it longhand. And so early on, I was really obsessed with the show Family Ties. And I thought that this is how you get into the industry. I wrote an episode of Family Ties that featured Michael Gross, who played Stephen Keaton. It would have been his episode of the year that he had a big monologue, and it was really even not a typical Family Ties episode. It would have been a horrible spec because it was kind of It's a Wonderful Life meta piece. Anyway, I sent it to him. I sent it out to him, and it had those little spirals on it that cookbooks have, and 3 weeks later, I get this letter, handwritten letter from Michael Gross, how much he loved the scripts, and he's going to send it along to the writers, and the ball's in their court. And I'm phoning immigration lawyers. How do I get to the U.S.? And then when it became a real writer, I realized how poison that script would be, and how grateful and how lucky I was that Michael Gross even read it, because he shouldn't have. Plagiarism laws. He should have just turned it over to legal, and they should have shredded it without ever opening the envelope. So I wrote it, and there was a Canadian writer, Katie Ford, Jane's their wonderful sister, and she was on Family Ties, so she helped me a little bit trying to get in, but it just never worked out because I was a Canadian kid, I didn't have immigration, and I wasn't experienced enough. But I just kept on writing and writing and writing, and the first thing I wrote of note that got me an agent, Charlie Northcote, his name was, at Core Group, was a thing based on my grandmother, who at that time was going through some medication. She was hallucinating, and she dreamed she didn't dream. She believed she was going to get married. Someone was coming to marry her, and she was well into her 80s. So I wrote a 1-hour drama called The Summer Baba Got Married. And I said it in 1942 with a teenage protagonist with her grandmother, and Charlie read it and said, "Okay, yeah, this is a voice I want to represent."
Very cool. And so you got a TV gig fairly early. 94 is the first one I see on IMDb. I know how IMDb can be sort of not complete, but when did that first translate into a TV staff gig?
It actually came through connections. My first writing gig ever was with a funny guy named Luciano Casimiri, who was kind of the fifth Kids in the Hall. He was like the guy that Bruce McCullough says the funniest guy ever, but he didn't really want to be a Kids in the Hall. It wasn't for him, even though he was a very important voice to them. And we became writing partners. And then there was a sitcom called The Mighty Jungle, which was about animals in a zoo that could talk, and most were animatronics. And the ape was this woman from France, because it was a co-production, who was inside a monkey suit, and they all talked. And Mark Blutman, who's still very active, maybe you follow him on Twitter, and Howard Buzzgang were the co-executive producers. And I, use your in. And this was like the first in I ever had. And Luch and I went and pitched, and we pitched like crazy. We pitched hard. And that typical Hollywood story, or that, the last one, well, we got this other one about the ape who finds a little kitten and doesn't want to give her up. And they liked that one, and they bought it. So that was my first real writing job. And they were very gracious. Bernie Ornstein was the showrunner, and he let Luch and I sit in the writer's room for the week. So we got to see that experience, and that was just tremendous of him.
Very, very cool. And so tell me about that time. Tell me about your next few series and how you really got your legs.
Yeah, well, it really just was slow. I was still doing stand-up. And then I worked on a show called Whimsy's House, which was sort of for one of I think it was the man who wrote the Mr. Hooper Died episode of Sesame Street and won an Emmy. He was doing this show about whimsy and Muppets and Yaya. And again, I pitched really hard for that, and I got a couple episodes. And then my real big break in the industry, I always say it won't be the biggest job I ever got, but it was the most important job, was when Breakup High came. And it was a show about kids on a boat. And it was like the UPN, I think, was doing it. And it was a Canadian co-production, even though the writer's room was in LA. And they needed half writing room, had to be half Canadians. But I was lucky because I had been writing for so long. And by then I had learned the format. I bought Script Saver or Screensaver or something, Scriptware. So I knew how to write like a sitcom writer. And my agent sent 2 of my scripts down to the writers, the producers of Breakup High. And I actually ended up getting hired twice, I found out, because, and this is quite a long time ago when there weren't Canadian writers weren't hip to sitcoms. They didn't know what a spec script was. So, people were sending in poems and sketches and, like Second City kind of sketches. And they were having trouble finding writers, and they had a small pile of writers' spec scripts that they liked. And at the end of the day, they're going to go through them and say, well, let's see who we should meet out of this. And 2 out of the 6 scripts are mine. They got separated in the pile, and they kind of went, okay, I think that this guy is this guy's a shoo-in. And that was so I did quit stand-up. I went down to Los Angeles, and I worked on Breakup High, where I believe this to be true. I wrote Ryan Gosling's first TV kiss.
Wow!
So I take some credit because he was a nerd until I wrote that episode, and then we sort of get that sexy mojo happening. So I think he hasn't mentioned me yet, but I think he does owe me a thank you.
Very, very cool. And so now that was in LA, but it was a co-pro. So were you paid out of Canada, or how did that work?
I was paid out of Canada. Yeah, it's in fact the Americans were getting WGA, they were getting residuals. The only thing I got better than them was a production fee. That was a little bit, and they may still be making $10 a year out of it. I'm not seeing a dime, but I tell you, the dollar was horrible back then. It was like 67 cents or something, and Charlie, my agent, actually got it to 70 cents or something. Okay. I was never been happier in my life.
Wow.
It's like you're still a single guy, and you're still making TV money, even though it's lower end TV money. I was making, like at best, not at best, but average $500 a week as a stand-up comic. And I remember my friend, the great late Eric Tunney, once saying to me, we were driving to Sudbury from Toronto, which is maybe a 5-6 hour drive. And he said to me, if somebody told you, hey, Brent, I'm going to ask you to drive to Sudbury for 6 hours, pick up a check for $200, and come right back, would you do it? I don't really think I want to do that. Now we're adding a horrible gig where people will yell at you and you sleep in a horrible bed. And, we're off in the middle of winter driving to Sudbury. So I kind of lost the passion a little bit for stand-up. So this came along at the right time for me. And I work with that writer's room then, like Peter Knight, who's is still a very prolific writer, and it was a great writer's room. I met so many people. John Wing was there, Kelly Senecal, Rob Baird, he wrote the sequel to Monsters Inc. And Abby Charette was a great showrunner. It was a fun time of my life, to be honest. I just also got out of a marriage, so it was nice not to be back in Toronto thinking of that.
Yeah, very cool. And so did you come back to Canada for a while, and when did you make the move to the US?
I have technically always stayed in America, although what happened, Breakup High changed my status as a Canadian writer. So my career has mostly been Canadian gigs, but because I had an American credit, Breakup High was huge in Canada for a while. Radio Free Roscoe, which was in co-production with the Nick. I can't remember what it's called now, but it was The End, which was a Nickelodeon kind of edgy network. They needed, I was pushed as this Canadian guy with American sensibility, and I became a showrunner like right away, almost right out of the bat. And I wasn't. I was good in that I knew how to write and I knew how to run a room, but I go to these production meetings and I'd have to. They say like, hey, we're gonna need a F416, and I go, oh, what's that? Oh, that's the signal for security. And go, oh, okay, thank you. And John Delmage was the technical showrunner. Like he didn't do any story writing, but he was the money guy, and he was a prince to me. He took me under his wings, and never made me feel bad because I didn't know anything. And he was a great guy to help me learn the steps, because I'd only been on a couple shows and I was show running series.
Yeah. Wow. So it was kind of a sink or swim, and you swam.
Yeah. I think I'm lucky that maybe I was so naive. I didn't know, and I didn't even know protocol. I just was like nice guy who went with it. And I think if I had known what I was up against, I might have been a little more panicked. It's sort of thrown into the game, and I've never played before. So what else can go wrong? Nothing.
No. And so you show ran a few shows. Naturally Sadie, latest Buzz. Tell me about sort of the next little while.
I became the teen guy. I didn't start out being a teen guy, but I became the teen guy, and I ran this second and third season of Naturally Sadie when the production company Decode, with Jennifer Dodge, who was always great to me, wanted to go a different direction, and that's when I really started feeling like a showrunner, knowing how to get best out of writers and knowing how to break story and do season arcs. And Naturally Sadie was a lot of fun. Great cast, and I've worked with a lot of great, talented actors, and because of that got me a pitch meeting with family. And I remember the night before, I just won, I think it was my second of 3 Writers Guild Awards, and I even brought it with me to the pitch meeting, and I pitched the latest Buzz, and they bought it. I don't want to these people they bought it in a room, because that's not true, but they bought it pretty soon after. And that was the first Decode show that went its entire, I think this is true, it's like 136 episodes or something crazy like that. Because Radio Free Roscoe, the Noggin, that's what it was, the Andrew Noggin, didn't buy a third series because they wanted to go with another show. They wanted something edgier, so we never got a third season. But they also held back their rights, so we couldn't do it on our own. So it was really frustrating, because Radio Free Roscoe is probably the show I did to Canadians and some Americans that is the show that they were brought up on. It's the show. If I can go off path here, one time I was flying from LA, this is about 7 or 8 years ago, to Calgary, because my father was not doing well. He was pretty sure, he was determined he was going to die. So I was flying home, and I was taking a cab from the airport in Calgary to my mom and dad's place. And I got this young cab driver, and I only mention his ethnicity for the point of the story, is he was I believe Indian. And he was he's a very nice young man. He's like, "What do you do?" And he doesn't know my dad is dying. I don't want to burden him with this. I'm horrible. My father's going to die. So I say, "Oh, I'm a writer." And then like, "Well, what have you written on?" And he knows nothing of what I've written. So now, not only am my dad's dying, this guy doesn't, I'm not validated by this camera. I go, "Oh, well, I did write this show called Radio Free Roscoe." And he looks up. He says, "No way." And he honestly starts trembling, like, and we're running up to my parents' house. And he goes, "Radio Free Roscoe was the first show," because we had a character played by Ali McAdam who was brown-skinned, and ethnicity never really stead. But he goes, "Hey, that was the first character I saw that was like me, the class clown, like they didn't study, and you let me be." Like that show was so important to me because of that character. And he took a picture with me. He called his sister, and I talked to his sister. And that was sort of the last story I ever got to tell my dad. Wow. So it's really cool, that I have worked on some stuff that isn't famous, but and on the opposite end of that story, I met a writer who lost his virginity to an episode of Breakup High that I had written. So, it's like, okay, I have played an important part in people's teenagers' lives.
Very, very cool. And latest Buzz was one that you created? Yeah, I mean, that was your idea?
It was I created, I cast, Network, obviously, and Project 10 had a big voice on it, but it was the first time I really had a show, and also kind of the first time where I was trusted a little bit to do what I want. And, and we had all those kids are still working, especially Vanessa Morgan, who I believe is still on Riverdale. She's sort of the one person I've ever auditioned, Vanessa, that when she came in, I turned to Jennifer Dodge, and she looked at me and goes, "Yeah, she's this is our kid. This kid knows comedy." And Yeah, so and that was a sweet time. I really liked that show, and those kids, they were just and my writers. I worked with Barb, my wife, on that show, and that was tremendous fun, and just a great writing staff.
Did you meet on that show, or you were already married
No,
at that point?
I think we were married by then, or about to be married. I met her through a director, a blind date. I used a director whose best friend was Barb's best friend, and they said, "Hey, I think we both got set up because we're tall." Hey, do you know a tall woman? Yes, Barb's 6'1". I go, well, this guy's 6'4", and then, well, of course, they have to be in love, and we were.
Very cool. You must have tall kids.
If we had them, we would, but it did not work out for us.
No. Very cool. So, and then after that, the next executive producer credit I see is Spun Out. What happened between latest Buzz and then?
Yeah, a few years of doing kids animation. Things that probably don't end up on IMDb because maybe nobody takes care of that kind of stuff. And then during the latest Buzz, there was an American director who had moved to Canada, Brian Roberts, and with a resume that, from The Simpsons to almost every one of those Drew Carey type sitcoms of the 90s he had worked on. And I believe he got a production deal with Project 10, where they were going to use the latest Buzz set, which the latest Buzz was a show about kids who ran Teen Beat magazine. Mm-hmm. So it looked like an office. And he had wanted to, he approached Jeff Biederman, my friend Jeff Biederman, and me. Do you guys want to write a sitcom about a PR firm where everybody can spin everybody's own lives but their own, basically, was the premise. And we did. We wrote something, and it was pretty good, and we were going to shoot it. And somebody got cold feet. I think it was Project 10. I think they just, or maybe the script got read by CBC and they didn't like it. I can't remember. We never shot it. And I kind of think this day and age, demo reels or sizzle reels or whatever aren't that effective. I think a good pitch and a passionate pitch and a good script would do as much to you than casting or producing a little mini sitcom. So about 3 or 4 years later, I still really loved the script that Jeff and I wrote, and Brian was part of too. And I wrote, and I wasn't working. So I called Jeff Biederman and said, "Hey, whatever happened to this Spun Out?" He goes, I think actually now the options run out on it. I go, we should try to do something with it. So I had once had a meeting with Andrew Barnsley, and this is when he worked for Steve Smith. Is that the Red Green Steve Smith? Do you know the Red Green show? I think that's who it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but he had now moved over to Project 10, and it was one of those meetings. It was a general, but we really hit it off. And he tried to get me work on a Samantha Bee sitcom that didn't get off the ground. But I took the script to Andrew because Andrew was looking for pilots. I said, "Hey, I got this thing, and I don't know where it stands. So I think we have the rights." And I sent it to him, and he wrote back like 45 minutes later. Let's do something. And,
wow.
and Andrew's a real passionate guy, and he took it to CTV and CBC, and CTV optioned it pretty close. And Andrew's gone on to do Schitt's Creek, but this is sort of I'd like to think the door that was open for him to eventually get Schitt's Creek and do amazing stuff on that. And so we, CTV bought it. Jeff, Brian, and I were the executive producer, co-creators, and it ran for 2 seasons. It kind of got, unfortunately, a little political. Some bad stuff happened. I don't really like to go in for legal reasons, not with me, but one of the cast members had a camera in his place, and anyway, it sort of shut things down for a 3rd season. I just think it put a bad taste on the show, but. Yeah, working with Dave Foley, casting Dave Foley from I didn't cast him. Actually, Brian Roberts did a lot of legwork because Dave was down, and I don't know that he could fly at that time or something. Brian did a lot of the legwork to get Dave on the show. Mm-hmm. And Dave Foley is one of the funniest, most talented actors who generous, like everything you want in a lead. Dave Foley was.
Very, very cool. So catch me up to the present, last few years, COVID time and all of that. What have you been up to?
I've been finding my way back into animation, kids animation. I mean, I had a couple years where I wasn't working, but I've done some stuff for Spin Cycle. I'm sorry, that's not it. They do the Paw Patrol production company, very amateur for me not to remember. But I've worked for them. I've been working for Mattel. In fact, when I get back from Canada, I'll be doing a summit with Mattel for their kids shows, and I love it. I don't even want to say it's not my dream gig. It's just it's fun work. It's hard work. You know, people don't realize that you got to spend as much time breaking a story, you know, it's 11 minutes as you do just 22 minutes. And in a way, it's harder because you have to teach a lesson, and you have to, you have to have guidelines, and you've also, you have all kinds of people. You think network notes can be intense? Like you got everybody, educational notes, and the beauty of it though, and I say this with no animosity, it's great to work on a show that you don't have ownership to. Because I swear to God, I work as hard as ever to make, because my guy I work for, Craig Carlisle, a wonderful. First of all, there was a guy, Rick Sawville, who brought me on, and then Craig took over. I don't want to leave, I don't want to leave him with a lame script. So I do everything they say. But when a joke doesn't, a little funny pun you come up with, they don't like, or they want a different thing, or they decide to change the character, it's really nice to say, oh, okay, go back to the typey, because. I say there are times in my life where I took notes a little too personally, like, oh, this is such a good joke, or this moment's so important. And it ate me up a little bit. Now there's just a freedom to do great work, but not have the responsibility of like being upset that it's not my voice, it's not my vision, but I want to make sure whoever it is gets. Oop.
Oh, a little bit of a Skype blip there.
Okay. You're just staring at me like, oh my God, did I see them?
Cool. Well, let's transition a little bit to
Sure.
more global stuff. So tell me sort of some lessons you've learned over the years in terms of dealing with different rooms, different situations. How you, when you walk into a room and you don't know what to expect, how do you read the room? That kind of thing.
It has changed a lot since when I first started. When I was on According to Jim, and I was just a staff writer, the room was very obnoxious. I mean, it was sort of the stories of what you hear, where people were competitive for jokes. People were very dirty with their jokes sometimes. But it was also fun. There was a lot of great people I met on that show too, and I really enjoyed it. So I think now the most important thing is trying to make sure everybody's heard. As a showrunner, I'm often, because I also would hire stand-ups, male stand-ups, and sometimes they would be a little bit no problem interrupting. Because they're anxious to tell their joke, and that's how stand-ups work. You're out for dinner with stand-ups or lunch, and everyone's just bantering, and you want everyone to hear what everyone has a right to hear. What so I'm often like, okay, wait, we'll get to you, but let's hear what this person has to say. So I think overall, just there's a more of a kindness and professionalism that you see in rooms that probably should have always been there, but because of the times, they aren't. But also, I will say, rooms shouldn't be like board meetings either. If there is a little bit of risque jokes. I mean, you don't want to be thinking you're at a PTA meeting either.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about the differences that you've seen between Canadian rooms, American rooms, if there is.
Well, the main one is size, and I think that the Americans are catching up to size. Like, latest buzz we had, last year was Barb, Darren Rose, me and Matt Schiller worked as a writer as well, and he was also the script coordinator. You know, on Belushi, we had 20, like 2 rooms of 10 or 12 people in it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, everything and craft service is better in this. I think that's the biggest thing. Craft service is way better in the States. So, and nothing against the people in Canada, but you know, they just got better. You know, it's funny. You probably go to the Trader Joe's and you see that person with the 2 grocery carts full of chips and health and coconut water. You go, okay, I wonder what show she's working on. Yeah. So, and I haven't been in an American room for a while, so maybe they've changed too.
Mm-hmm. And what about sort of on the page? Do you read a lot of scripts in terms of submissions when you're hiring people?
I will say that's one thing I was really excited about when we had a second season of Spun Out. Jeff Biederman and I read every script that was submitted to us. Because when I was a young writer, I before I got my first job, I would call everything, like, you know, every animated show. Will you read me? Will you know? Oh, it's a Canadian sitcom. Can I pitch? And no. And I get it because you don't make the same money, but often like the showrunner wants to write 6 episodes. That means we only have 2 freelance, and they're going to his friend. So I wanted to make sure every person who wanted a chance got in. I think Jeff and I read about 50 writers and met half of them. And we left so many talented people behind just because we couldn't afford to keep them. But, you know, there's so many funny writers that I go, God, if we had a room of 10, you'd be working. And, but I was happy with the writing room that we had. We had a really talented staff, but yeah, read. And even now, you know, I'm not that much in demand, but somebody, if you were to call me, I'd always, when I was a showrunner, I would get an email from somebody I didn't know. I always tried to meet with them because, you know, and sometimes you just can't. You just go, God, I'm in the middle of editing 3 episodes and shooting 2. But, you know, the older you get, the more you hope to want to help other people.
Yeah. And what to you makes a script that stands out?
Heart. When I know, like, if I can go back to the summer Baba got married, I know I'm the only person in the world who has a script about an 83-year-old Ukrainian woman believing she's going to marry somebody. So if I can read A Modern Family where, oh my God, you found the episode that it was right there for everybody to take. You were the only one to find it. And usually that comes from because somebody was sharing something in their life. I can't say it's something like, yeah, I know a friend who wrote a spec of, or not a spec, a freelance of Everybody Loves Raymond. And, you know, it was a true story. And he just made it Ray and Robbie and their dad somehow. And it's like, okay, of course it's a true story because I could never think of that story, but it was right there.
Very, very cool. And what about sort of, as you look back over the last, 30 years or so, what have been the sort of life skills that you've needed to navigate this industry, the ups and downs, the freelance work? How have you been able to weather the ebbs and flows?
I haven't always, you know, that's why I have a doctor and a therapist. I think the most important thing is I'm very lucky, and it kind of drives my wife crazy. I do love to write. So when I'm not writing, when I'm not working, I'm writing. I'm writing a book. I'm writing a movie. I'm writing a series for myself. And sometimes it makes you feel like, well, what the hell? What's the point? But it has, you know, helped me. And then you just never know that one spec that you've written. All of a sudden there's a show that's kind of like that. And they're looking for writers and you have that script. And when I was trying to be a writer in between, every year I wrote 2 new spec scripts. This is when you didn't write your own script. You wrote a Grounded for Life or Friends or whatever. I wrote whatever the show was that was kind of hot, but like maybe this year I would write a Ghost or something like that, where I wouldn't write a Abbott Elementary because I imagine there's 300 of them. Like I did read So Many Modern Families when Jeff and I were staffing, but I can't blame him when they love the show. It's got such a distinguished, it's got such a voice. It's easy to write for because they've done such a good job setting up. So yeah, I forgot. I think I rambled and forgot the question, Gray.
It was what helped you get through the ebbs and flows,
and believing that it'll be your turn again. Larry Gelbart, who was one of my first, the first guy ever made me want to do this was Neil Simon. I would get his plays out from our high school library and read them over and over again. And then Larry Gelbart. And he would say to every writer he hired, "It's not your turn." And it's a good advice for young writers, because sometimes, on According to Jim, sometimes I was too vocal, even though I was right about the moment. I wasn't my place to say it. And now kind of I'd say, it's not your turn yet, but it will be. There's just, if you keep writing and keep on believing yourself and try to be a good person and people like you, someone's going to remember you again. So, and I've had a great run of it too. It's not like I'm starving for work or anything. I would love to work more full time again. And I've got series that are being looked at right now, but you know how it is. It's like, I know what those things mean. Doesn't mean we're going into production on tomorrow, right? I know that if somebody likes my script, it's being read by an actor who I really like, but I know that that's a long ways away.
Yeah, definitely. I know that continuing to produce material helps your sanity. But what's your writing habit like when you're not working?
I get up pretty early. I'm an early riser. Get that from my dad. Go to the gym. Go to Orange Theory Fitness. Maybe come back at around 10 or 10:30. I write, and I write till about 4 in the afternoon with lunch breaks and TikTok breaks. But I like to put in like 4 to 5 hours a day. And I don't want people thinking like this guy's a writing machine. There are days where I put in -5 minutes a day, kind of. There are days where I just, I don't believe I've ever had a day where I've written as much as I plotted out to. I'm going to write, even if I write 9 hours, I probably plan to write 10. It's just, nothing ever goes. The only time I did as much as I needed to was on Rescue Heroes. I worked on this for, again, Mattel. And there were days where I was writing 12 hours a day just because I had to. There would be nothing to voice if I didn't. So I remember working on this was right after 9/11 because we had to change an episode. Rescue Heroes were about these super cops, super ambulance drivers, and they would save people from rescues. And we were working on one where the plane crashed into a tower after, and then 9/11 happened. And we were like, wow. Okay, we'll probably rewrite that one. But I remember working on that show so hard that I finally went outside to pick up some groceries, and there was 3 newspapers sitting on my porch. And I realized, I haven't even been outside in 3 days, to the point where I remembered I got the LA Times delivered to my door.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very cool. So if we'll start to wrap things up here, but
sure.
Before we go, well, first of all, is there anything that you feel passionate about that you would like to say to somebody who's breaking in, or it could be something you wish you had known when you were a person starting out? Yeah,
just always be kind, I think. If I could go back and change things for myself, I was a little too wrapped up in who am I better than, who's better than me, that show's not as good as people think it is. And it's hard not to be that. We love shows, but I would just say, be a nice person, be good in the room. Because when I look back at my career, I have not yet regretted being nice. There's never a time, even when that person once stabbed me in the back, I have never gone back and go, I should have been a jerk, And there was one time when I rightfully got mad at a production manager because they had done something egregiously unprofessional. And we had talked about it, but they didn't understand the moment. And I don't want to, because the person, anyway, I yelled at that person for about a minute because they really could have shut down the production, what they had done. And I felt good for a minute and a half. And I went, like, I don't look back at that like people were scared of Brent. I feel like, oh, I could have taken that person into my office and said, this is why I'm mad at what you did. And this is, and had we both of us talked it out, I think I could have, I understood why she was upset about something. She was wrong. She didn't understand a line in the script. But if she didn't understand it, maybe somebody else wouldn't understand it. So she had a legitimate thing, but the way she went about it, she was kind of a coup. I said, well, okay, we don't know who it is. So a wonderful person. I'm happy we talked about it years later, but I look back at that with a little bit of a shame. And the worst thing, this was when I was a young stand-up, and I was working a lot. And my agent called me, and I was staying at my mom and dad's over Christmas, and they called for some gig. And I was a little short with my stand-up agent. And, I don't want to do the gig then. I don't remember what I said. And I hung up, and my dad said, Brent, I was the vice president, probably the wrong title, but I was the vice president of Show Canada for 25 years. I never talked to the guys in the mailroom the way you just talked to your peer there.
Wow.
And that was like the most humbling thing. Because my dad, he was a great man. And so I can't say I always did well after that, but I tried. And the biggest lesson I learned about TV was when we were doing the latest Buzz, and we would show at lunchtime rough cuts for the cast, for the crew, and we were sitting there, and there's this little boy, the cutest kid, and he was an extra. He was the one that would walk past the halls, and he had these big running shoes. We even had a meeting, like, should we let him have the running shoes? Because we'll always know it's him, and we decided to let him have the running shoes. And he's with his mom, and he's watching the episode, and he sees his moment where it's him walking to the door. And he got up, and he pointed like this, and his mom hugged him. And it was like, oh, that made me realize everybody wants their thumbprint on an episode. So that's so when you get a note that you don't like, just realize that they're trying to tell you, I want to be part of this. I really like this show. Notes have driven me crazy over the years. And there's probably times I got my nose out of joint over notes. But the most time notes are like people love you and they want your show to be better. Now, I'm sure writers are saying, some are just, they don't know what they're talking about, maybe. But my experience, I've worked with some really fabulous people. And even though I've disagreed with their notes, when I go home and think about them, stew over them, I'm going to go, oh, it's like the old adage, listen to what is it? Don't listen to the note, but to the meaning behind the note kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So
the note, note behind the note. So and if you were to walk into a high school class right now, and there were some people that wanted to be a TV writer, what advice would you tell them in today's landscape to best attack? Go ahead.
Get any job you can, because even those jobs are hard to get. It's easy to say, you should just be somebody's writer's assistant, but start, follow great people on Twitter that are writers, like Mike Royce. Names escape me now, but there's, look for the showrunners and the movie writers on Twitter and read them. Read what they say. Read their scripts. Go down to the Writers Guild library if you're in LA and read scripts. Read the old scripts. I mean, I'm in a writers group, and sometimes, I date myself because I'll mention a TV show that they've never heard, but then I kind of go, well, you should know who Sid Caesar is, and because I wasn't born when these people were around. It's not like I'm not so old. I was stay up with my folks to watch shows or, even, Leave It to Beaver or any of these shows. So absorb yourself with as much TV as you can. I joke that when I won, I think it was my third WGC, I thank my parents for never making me go outside and play. Because we did watch a lot of TV as kids growing up. And be ready and just reach out. If you can reach out to somebody in a nice, professional, non-threatening way, if they're a good person, they will at least say, hey, nice meeting you. I can't help you right now, but please stay in touch, or if anything comes. So, I mean, you're probably the same way. If somebody reaches out, you want to at least, you don't want to kill their dreams. And if you have the time, if somebody, especially a high school kid, sent me a script and I had time, which I would read it. Because, I mean, yes, I've also done it professionally where I've given notes, so I don't want to become known as the guy that, reads scripts for free. But yeah, I would offer to read their script and tell them to see who they can meet. Go to tapings or shows if it's a multicam you want to do.
Yeah, I've mentioned this a couple times on the podcast, but when I was first starting out, I just asked person after person after person in the industry, would you have coffee with me? Just tell me about the industry. Tell me about how to get started. And I can't remember one person saying no.
Yeah.
And same thing when I got to LA. I just asked a whole pile of people if they would have coffee with me. I mean, big directors, showrunners, not one person said no.
Yeah. I think most people who are successful are good people. Hart Hansen is another guy to follow. He's a great person, great showrunner, Canadian. And I think that if you're a creative person, you're usually a good person. Of course, there's, not everybody, but I think that we want to help people. Because you don't be threatened by people, especially if you're a writer and you find out that there's an opening for a show and someone might be better suited for that show than you, tell them, even though it may hurt your chances, because they will do the same for you and find you a show that you're better for. So yeah, networking is really important. And start trying to go to writers groups and just try to do anything you can. And then eventually someone will say, hey, we need someone to fill in for a day as a script supervisor or script coordinator or whatever, and you might get the job and then get the episode. Yeah,
very cool. And in Canada, would it be right to say moving to Toronto would be important?
Yeah, I did once talk to a Calgary writer who I met with Calgary. A Calgary writer who I met when I was doing Caitlin's Way in Calgary, and she was like, I don't want to move to Calgary. Sorry, I don't want to move to Toronto. I like it here in Calgary. And I kind of said, then you don't belong. Like there's also no, you don't have to sugarcoat it for everybody. You go, then you don't want to be a writer. Maybe Vancouver has some rooms. They got some great showrunners out there. But yeah, Toronto or Vancouver, probably Toronto. Because it's like, if you want to be an actor, a real actor, you got to move to Los Angeles, or theater, you got to move to New York. You might, if you live in Cleveland, get a line or two when they come through their Cleveland productions. Just like I was watching that show about the Mormons, the murder mystery. What was that called? The Great Big Sky or something. Anyway, it was a great series about a detective who there's some murders amongst some Mormons, and everyone's screaming at me what it is. But all of a sudden, these Calgary actors start appearing. I go, oh, this was filmed in Calgary, and they did a great job. But they're not going to get the lead ever because they're not from. They're not where the work is. You have to go where the work is.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we will wrap things up now. On Twitter, you are
B Piaskoski. No, I'm Brent Piaskoski. That's right.
Brent Piaskoski. Just full name. Easy to find.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing about your path through the industry. And hopefully it's helpful to a lot of people.
I'm honored to do this. Great. And when I do get back from Calgary, we'll do that. We'll meet somewhere. I need an app called Meet Me in the Middle, which we plug in our addresses and it finds a place that we're looking for right in between, because you're a bit of ways away, but we do owe each other a coffee or a lunch. And I look forward to that.
Sounds great.
Okay. Take care.
That's it for the episode. You can find us on the web at tvwriterpodcast.com or at scriptmag.com. The video version of this podcast is available at iTunes, Podbean, or YouTube. The audio-only version is available at iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or Pandora. You can find me on Instagram at TV Writer Podcast. Follow me on Twitter, @GrayJones is my handle. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.